What if the biggest threat to Deshaun Watson's starting job isn't something Watson does wrong at all? What if it's Shedeur Sanders simply refusing to give Cleveland a reason to look away? Because the Browns' quarterback competition has reached the point where every practice rep feels like another piece of evidence. And the latest developments have made this battle much harder to ignore. Sanders is getting meaningful opportunities. He's building chemistry with Cleveland's young weapons. And he's showing the kind of confidence that can turn a backup quarterback into a legitimate threat for the starting job. That doesn't mean Cleveland has named him QB1. They haven't. But it does mean Watson can no longer afford to treat this like a competition that's already decided. And that's where this story gets interesting. Shedeur Sanders entered this offseason knowing he couldn't simply wait for his opportunity. He had to create one. Cleveland's quarterback room was always going to be complicated. There was Deshaun Watson, the veteran with enormous expectations and a massive amount of history behind him. There was Dillon Gabriel, another young quarterback fighting for his own chance. And then there was Sanders, a rookie surrounded by questions, but carrying enough talent and confidence to make people wonder whether Cleveland may have found something special. Todd Monken has made one thing clear from the beginning. This job isn't supposed to be handed out based on reputation. The quarterbacks are going to be evaluated through actual work. Monken has even explained that the reps won't necessarily be divided equally because the coaching staff needs to see different players in different situations. In other words, every opportunity matters. And Sanders has been treating every one of those opportunities like it could be the rep that changes his career. That mentality started showing up before training camp even reached this point. During mandatory minicamp, Sanders received first-team opportunities and connected with Denzel Boston on a deep touchdown. He also found Isaiah Bond for another explosive score. On other days, Sanders worked with different groups, giving the coaching staff a chance to evaluate him from multiple angles. That's important, because Cleveland isn't simply trying to create a headline. They're trying to find out who can operate this offense. And Sanders keeps putting himself into the conversation. Then the chemistry started becoming one of the most interesting parts of the entire story. A quarterback can have a strong arm and still struggle if he doesn't understand where his receivers are going to be. He can throw beautiful passes during individual drills and look completely different once the defense starts disguising coverage and closing windows. That's why Sanders developing relationships with Cleveland's young weapons could matter more than any single highlight. Denzel Boston gives him a young receiver capable of making explosive plays. Fannin Jr. gives him a reliable target in the middle of the field. KC Concepcion gives the offense another young weapon who can create separation and turn short opportunities into something bigger. And when a quarterback starts anticipating where those players are going, instead of waiting for them to become completely open, that's when an offense begins to look different. That's also why the Denzel Boston play described in the original footage stands out. The important part isn't simply that the pass was completed, it's the decision behind it. A young quarterback under pressure has two choices: panic or trust the read. If the pocket starts collapsing and the quarterback immediately bails out, the play can disappear. But if he stays calm long enough to recognize where his receiver is going and delivers the football before the window closes, suddenly the defense is the one reacting. That's what makes anticipation so valuable at the NFL level. And if Sanders can consistently make those throws once the practices become more physical and the defensive looks become more complicated, the conversation around him changes completely. Because right now, that's the question Cleveland has to answer. Is Sanders simply having some impressive moments? Or is he beginning to show the traits that could eventually make him the best quarterback on the roster? Those are two completely different questions. A training camp highlight can make social media explode in seconds. Coaches aren't choosing a Week 1 starter based on a viral clip. They're watching footwork, they're watching processing speed, they're watching how quickly the ball comes out. They're watching whether the quarterback understands where the protection is going. They're watching what happens after a bad play. And most importantly, they're watching whether good decisions can be stacked together over and over again. That's where Todd Monken's evaluation becomes so important. Monken has talked about the need for Sanders to improve his processing, get the ball out faster, and eliminate plays where the offense loses valuable yardage. That means Sanders isn't being judged simply on whether he can throw a beautiful football. He's being judged on whether he can run an NFL offense efficiently. And that's a much bigger challenge. Because here's the reality. Sanders isn't perfect. He isn't supposed to be. During training camp, there have already been moments where things didn't go his way. One of the latest practices included a pass that ended in an interception after the ball was tipped, with Denzel Boston involved in the play. At the same time, Sanders continued making positive plays, including finding KC Concepcion for a touchdown. That's exactly what a real quarterback competition looks like. Good plays, bad plays, adjustments, corrections. Another opportunity. The question isn't whether Sanders will make mistakes. Every quarterback will. The real question is what happens after the mistake. Does he become hesitant? Does he force another throw? Or does he come right back and make the next decision correctly? That's what Cleveland's coaches will remember. And that's where the pressure begins to shift toward Watson. Because Watson doesn't necessarily need to play badly for Sanders to become a problem. That's the uncomfortable reality of having a young quarterback behind you who keeps showing potential. Every time Sanders makes a big play, the coaching staff gets another piece of information. Every time he handles pressure correctly, another question gets answered. Every time he shows chemistry with a receiver, the possibility of building around him becomes a little easier to imagine. Watson's challenge isn't simply beating Sanders. It's proving that he gives Cleveland the clearest path to winning. And with Dillon Gabriel also competing for opportunities, there isn't room for anybody to assume the job is secure. The Browns have repeatedly made it clear that the quarterback competition is open. Monken has said the best player will ultimately play, and the coaching staff has until the season opener to make the decision. That tells you exactly how seriously Cleveland is taking this. They aren't looking for a temporary answer. They're trying to figure out which quarterback deserves the responsibility when the games actually count. And Sanders is giving them more and more reasons to keep watching. The most important thing about this quarterback battle is that the internet wants a winner immediately, while Cleveland's coaching staff wants the right answer in September. Those are two completely different timelines. Fans can watch one impressive throw and decide Shedeur Sanders is ready. Critics can watch one mistake and decide he's nowhere near ready. But the Browns can't afford to make the decision that way. They have to watch everything: the footwork, the reads, the accuracy, the communication, the response to pressure, the way the quarterback handles mistakes, and eventually how all of those things translate when the games become real. That's why the latest developments matter, without automatically meaning Sanders has won anything. If anything, the uncertainty makes the story more interesting. Sanders has received first-team opportunities during camp, including work with the top group in 11-on-11 situations, while Watson has continued taking reps with projected starters in other periods. That doesn't mean Cleveland has chosen Sanders. It means the Browns are actively testing their options. And that could become a major storyline as camp continues. Because once the coaching staff starts seeing Sanders operate with better chemistry and more confidence, the question changes. It stops being, can this rookie play? It becomes, how close is this rookie to being the best option? That difference is enormous. Sanders doesn't need to destroy Watson every afternoon. He doesn't need to throw 5 touchdowns every practice. He doesn't even need to be perfect. What he needs to do is create separation. One great day can be dismissed. One viral throw can be dismissed. But if he continues stacking accurate throws, quick decisions, improved processing and command of the offense, eventually the coaching staff has to take that seriously. That's how a backup becomes a legitimate candidate. And that's also why Watson can't simply focus on his own reputation. Reputation doesn't take the snap on opening day. Performance does. The longer Sanders continues showing that he can operate the offense, the harder it becomes to dismiss him as nothing more than a developmental project. And then there is the chemistry with Fannin Jr, which could become especially important. The quarterback-tight end relationship is one of those things that can quietly change an offense. A tight end who understands how to find the soft spot in coverage gives a quarterback an outlet when pressure arrives. A quarterback who trusts that tight end can release the ball before the window fully opens. That's how timing develops. It isn't created by one practice. It's built through hundreds of repetitions. And when Sanders and Fannin continue finding each other in those spaces, Cleveland gets another piece of information about what this offense could look like. Add Denzel Boston's big playability and KC Concepcion's explosiveness, and suddenly Sanders has something every young quarterback needs: weapons he can grow with. That's a huge part of this story. The Browns aren't just evaluating Sanders in isolation. They're evaluating what the entire offense looks like when he's operating it. If the ball is coming out on time, if the receivers are getting opportunities, if the offense is creating explosive plays, and if the quarterback keeps the unit moving, the coaching staff will notice. And that's where Todd Monken becomes the wild card. Monken isn't interested in choosing a quarterback because of hype. He wants the player who can execute the system. His message throughout the offseason has been consistent. The best player will play. That sounds simple, but it puts enormous pressure on everyone in the room. Watson has to prove the veteran experience still gives him an advantage. Gabriel has to show why Cleveland should trust him. Sanders has to prove that his talent can survive the complexity and physicality of an NFL season. Nobody gets the job for free. And that makes the upcoming preseason games potentially more important than all the social media debates combined. Practice can show potential. Preseason can reveal how a quarterback responds when the situation starts feeling real. The protection won't always be perfect. Receivers won't always be exactly where they're supposed to be. Defensive players will disguise coverages. The pocket will collapse. The quarterback will have to make decisions without knowing exactly what is coming. That's when the conversations about processing speed become real. That's when accuracy under pressure matters. That's when a quarterback's response to adversity becomes impossible to hide. Sanders has already shown that he can create excitement. Now he has to show that he can create consistency. And that's a completely different challenge. Because if he struggles once the preseason arrives, the coaching staff can slow the momentum down. If he thrives, the pressure on Watson becomes very real. That's the fascinating part. Sanders doesn't need to win the public argument. He needs to win the internal argument happening inside the Browns facility. He needs coaches to look at the film and say, "We can't ignore this anymore." And the danger for Watson is that this doesn't have to happen overnight. It can happen gradually. One strong practice, one smart decision, one explosive completion, one successful response after a mistake. Then another. Then another. Suddenly, the quarterback who was supposed to be learning is becoming someone the coaching staff has to seriously consider. That's how competition changes. Nobody announces the exact moment it happens. You just wake up one morning and realize the conversation is different. A few weeks ago, people could easily talk about Sanders as a developmental quarterback. Now the question is becoming whether he can push his way into the starting conversation. And if that continues, Watson's biggest problem won't be one bad throw. It will be the growing belief that Cleveland may have another option. That's why the next phase of camp matters so much. The Browns are moving closer to situations where quarterbacks have to execute rather than simply learn. The offense is becoming more familiar. The defense is becoming more aggressive. The evaluation becomes sharper. And Sanders now has an opportunity to prove whether these early flashes are sustainable. Because Cleveland doesn't need a quarterback who wins August. They need someone they trust when the season gets ugly. They need someone who can stand in the pocket when the pass rush is coming. Someone who can process quickly when the defense disguises the coverage. Someone who can make the safe throw when the explosive play isn't there. Someone who can recover after throwing an interception instead of allowing one mistake to become three. If Sanders can show those things, the entire equation changes. And that's why this isn't really a story about one spectacular throw to Denzel Boston or one touchdown to KC Concepcion. It's about accumulation. It's about the little moments stacking together until the coaching staff has enough evidence to make a difficult decision. The Browns don't have to announce anything today. They shouldn't. But every strong practice from Sanders makes that future decision a little